YouTube traffic, this is 345 Delta Foxtrot, ready to record another video. YouTube traffic. This is my standard disclaimer. If you haven't already seen it, please take a few seconds to check it out. Okay, today's topic is smoothing, deburring, and or polishing aluminum edges. In the last video, we cut some aluminum, and some of the saws left a pretty rough edge, and some of them left a really large burr. So this video is about how to clean those edges up. I think this video might be fairly long, but I think you're going to find it fairly interesting, so try and hang in there. Okay, this is what we found in the last video. There you go. Now you can see better. So the one on the left is a cut after the bandsaw, and it is pretty rough with a very large burr. The next one over is the miter saw, cutting the piece of medical when the piece of medical was positioned vertically. It's a fairly reasonable cut with just a little bit of burr. And if you turn the piece of metal that you're cutting so that it's sitting horizontally in the miter saw, that's the third one over. It's a pretty clean cut with very little burr, so it's working pretty well. Next one over is the jigsaw, and it is a very rough cut. It's hard to cut a straight line. You have to have a steady hand. A little bit of burr, not too bad, but it definitely needs cleaning up pretty badly. Next one over is the Dremel, and it gives a fairly clean cut with a little bit of burr, but not too bad. You do have to cut freehand. So again, you need a pretty steady hand, and it's hard to get a nice straight cut. And the last one on the right is the aviation snips, and the snips have a serrated edge, so it gives a very large burr due to that serrated edge, which you can see in the picture there. Okay, we're going to divide this into 4 parts, at least initially. And we're going to talk about the bench grinder for cleaning things up, and then the belt sander, then a die grinder, and then other tools for cleaning things up. Okay, the first thing is the bench grinder. Okay, this is the bench grinder that I have. There's nothing great about it. It's just a bench grinder. It's fairly inexpensive. There's probably lots of people selling bench grinders. The one feature that it doesn't have, which I would kind of like to have, is it's not variable speed. This is essentially the same bench grinder. Well, it's not exactly the same. This one is 8-inch and mine is 6-inch. But this one is variable speed, so it's a little bit more expensive. But if I had to do it over again, I would probably spend the extra money. I'd probably try and find a 6-inch one. If you get an 8-inch, make sure that your wheels are going to fit, and that the arbor for your wheels is going to fit in your bench grinder. I believe well, let's see, maybe I can go back real quick. I don't know if it says here, I don't know if this has a 1/2 inch arbor or a 5/8 inch arbor. Well, I don't see it here. 1/2 inch arbor. So all the wheels that I'm going to talk about fit on this bench grinder with the 1/2 inch arbor. Okay, the bench grinder itself is not critical. Buy whatever you want. What you want to do is you want to spend your time on buying the right wheels for it. It's just like for the saw. You want to spend your time buying the right blade for your saw, and not the saw itself doesn't really matter that much. So the wheels that I have are the 3M Scotch-Brite wheel. That's sold by Cleveland Aircraft. Here it is. It's a 6 inch cut and polish wheel. It comes with a reducing bushing so that you can use it with different arbor sizes, from 1/2 inch up to 3/4 inch, it looks like. And I guess the hole itself is 1 inch. So this would work in anything from 1/2 to 1 inch. This is kind of the gold standard wheel for deburring edges. It works very well. I like it a lot. I highly recommend that you get this or something very similar to it. This one is called a 7A, and the 7 refers to the density of the wheel. So basically, if you take 7 Scotch-Brite pads and you compress them down into the size of 1 Scotch-Brite pad, that's a density of 7. And the A, I believe, refers to the fact that the grit is aluminum oxide. It's an excellent wheel. The only disadvantage to this wheel is it's kind of expensive. $137 for the wheel. So this wheel, if you buy a bench grinder like mine, this is going to cost more than twice as much as the bench grinder itself. So I went on Amazon and looked for less expensive wheels, and I bought this one, and we'll look at the results of this wheel in the next slide. It works pretty well. It's called a 9P, so in theory, it's supposed to be a little more dense than the 7A, but it sure doesn't seem like it. It seems like it's softer than the 7A. I'm not sure exactly what the P refers to. It might be that the grit is silicon carbide or something like that. You can look on the website and try and check that out. I don't think the composition of the grit really matters. So now the grit size, how coarse it is, that matters. And I believe that both of these are roughly 180 grit. But again, you might want, well, this one is definitely 180 grit. You can see it right there in the title for the web page. And the 7A is very similar. So it's somewhere in the 180 grit range. Then Cleveland Aircraft has introduced some new, more of a polishing type wheels. they're lighter, and they have these new HAAS wheels, which I don't have, and I don't really know anything about. So I'm just telling you about them. So if you want to check them out, you can. If you buy one, and please make a YouTube video about it. Let me know, or put a comment for this video. Let everybody know how well it works. Oops. Okay, these are micrographs of the edge after it's been, on the left is the Scotch-Brite 7A, and on the right is the AmaCupid 9P. These samples are the same as the ones I used when I was doing the cutting. They are 1/16 of an inch thick, which I think is about 66 thousandths. And they're 1.5 inches wide, although the picture is definitely not that wide. And they're 6000 series. I forgot, 6074 aluminum, or whatever it was. You can look at my last video if you want to know. I believe that's the zinc aluminum. The primary additive to the alloy is zinc. Again, you might want to check that if it matters to you. You can see the AmaCupid 9P appears to be a little softer, and the Scotch-Brite is actually it's a cut and polish wheel. It's actually removing some material, and it's leaving some scratch marks. It's a fairly hard wheel, so that it's not, well, if you look at the AmaCupid wheel over here on the right, you can see that it's a soft wheel, and the bristles of the wheel, or the fibers, it's a fiber wheel. They polished the edge of the sample, the surface of the sample as well as the edge. It affects, an 1/8 inch, and if it's an older wheel, up to 1/4 or maybe even 1/2 inch in from the edge. It's not a problem, except for the fact that the aluminum that Vans uses has a very thin, the 2024 alloy that they use has a very thin cladding of pure aluminum. And this wheel is going to remove that cladding, like I said, for 1/8 to, well, up to maybe even 1/2 inch. So you may not want that. If you're going to prime it or paint it, it may be okay. But if not, it may be undesirable for you. But you can definitely see how this wheel is rounding the corner, rounding the edge, which is good. Okay, in addition to the cut and polish wheels, there are some lighter wheels for light deburring and polishing. let's see, there we go. This is one that I have. It's fairly inexpensive. I forget to, let me go back. I think I forgot to show you this wheel. This is the AmaCupid 9P. It's only $16. It's available on Amazon. And this is the 5P, and it's even cheaper. And it's a density of 5 instead of a density of 9. So when it's new, it's not too bad, but after you use it for a while, it gets very frayed around the edges. And like I said, it really starts polishing into the surface as well as the edge of whatever, of your sample. Okay, this wheel is fairly new, at least on Amazon. It's another AmaCupid wheel. It's a little bit different. This one is advertised as a 2000 grit wheel, so that's a very fine grit. It's basically a polishing wheel. And this is not a fiber wheel. Let's see. They call it an elastic polyurethane polishing wheel. So this is a distinctly different composition, and that's why I bought it. It's a little more expensive than the 5P wheel, for example, but I thought it would be interesting to check out because of this different composition. Then Cleveland Aircraft has two other wheels, which I don't have. This is the 3M light deburring wheel. And again, I think this is kind of a new product for them. I don't recall seeing this when I bought my 7A wheel. Although this is a 7 density, but it's 7 fine as opposed to 7A. Again, it would be very interesting to try this out, and if you do, please leave a comment on how well it works. And they also have a different HAAS wheel, light deburring wheel. If these are not real expensive, but they're a little bit expensive if you don't really need it. I'm not making any money off these YouTube videos, so I will. If I was, I would take that and spend it on these wheels, so I could make a slightly better video. But I don't particularly have a need for these wheels, so I haven't purchased them. Okay, this is the AmaCupid 5P on the left and the AmaCupid 2000 grit on the right. The 5P does a pretty good job of polishing. It really smooths everything up. You can see some very small fine marks still on the edge. And like I said, these softer wheels, they do tend to polish up the surface a little bit, and they would remove any of that aluminum cladding on the surface as well. The 2000 grit wheel doesn't do that. It just polishes the or the edge of your sample and not the surface at all. Now the problem is the grit size is really a little too small. It polished up the edge here, but it polished it left the grooves in place and it just smoothed them out. I wish that this was available in like a 1000 grit. I think if it were available in 1000 grit, it might be an excellent wheel. But as it is, I would recommend it as, or I'd rate it as okay, but not great. I wouldn't go out of my way for this wheel. Okay, that's it for the bench grinder. Let's go on to the belt sander. Okay, this is the one that I have, Harbor Freight, their Central Machinery brand. It's only a 1-inch wide belt, 30-inch long belt. I got it on sale. Even when it's not on sale, it's not all that expensive. It's only $50. And if you get it on sale, it's an even better deal. You can probably get it for like $35 on sale. And I kind of bought it on a whim, but it's turned out to be pretty useful, and I like it, and I use it regularly. So I would recommend it, especially for the price. You know, this is, the tool is, you know, less expensive than just one of the wheels that we were just looking at, or well, one of the good ones, like the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel. It's another one of these things that if you have room for it, if you have a place in your garage, I would recommend it. In terms of setup, I messed with mine a little bit, and I can't say I really got it any better than the way it was when it came. Maybe a little bit. But one thing I did learn is that it is not designed to easily put belts on and off. It has a bolt that you have to loosen in order to move it has 3 wheels, and so loosen the bolt, it allows you to move one of the wheels and then take the sanding belt off. It's spring-loaded, so it looks like you should be able to leave the bolt loose and then just change your sanding belts, easily. But if you leave it loose, it vibrates very badly. So I found that you really want to just use it with one belt. Pick your belt, put it in, tighten it down, get everything set up, and just leave it. It does vibrate some. It's not too bad, but you probably want to find some way to clamp it down or put it on a stand or something. And it's also fairly messy. And that's true of the bench grinder as well. Let's see, I skipped over the setup on the bench grinder. I'm going to go back real quick because there's one thing that I wanted to talk about there. Oops. Okay. Okay, there's a picture. It comes with these guards that fit around the wheel, and comes with this little plastic shield. And I took all that off and basically threw it away. And I disconnected the motor from the base and turned it around, flipped it around so that basically it turns in the opposite direction. It's the way it comes is it's designed so that it turns so that the wheel is moving from top to bottom for your sample. Your sample goes on this little tray here. It's about a 1 inch by 1 inch tray. And the disadvantage of that is it's hard to use it on samples, say that are a foot or more in size. If you flip it around so that it rotates the other way, then the piece of metal that you're grinding is going to be up on top here, and you have a lot of freedom on, you can polish or grind a sample that is 2 or 3 feet long, just as long as you're able to just handle it, with your 2 hands. So you could, probably polish a 3-foot sample if you're reasonably careful. Now, so I find it very convenient, and I like it, and I'm going to leave mine set up that way. It is a little bit of a safety problem in that the wheel is now turning upwards, and it tends to throw any dust that it creates upward. And so definitely wear some sort of safety glasses if you do that. Since it is kind of a small safety problem, I'm not recommending that you do this. I'm just telling you that that's what I did, and I like mine like that. You could decide for yourself. If you decide to do that, make sure that anybody else that could possibly be in your shop or use the bench grinder knows about it. Otherwise, they're going to put the sample in, assuming that it turns in the normal direction, and the wheel is going to grab it and throw it back out at them because it's turning the opposite direction that they think it is. So definitely be careful about that. But it is a thing that I find fairly useful. And the same things apply to this as the belt sander. You're probably going to want to find some way to clamp it down because it will move around on you. And mine is in a stand, probably similar to this picture here. And that stand is pretty sturdy. It's a steel stand, but it still moves around. So I recommend mounting the stand on a piece of plywood that sticks out so that you can stand on the piece of plywood while you're using the bench grinder, and your weight will hold it down and keep it from moving. I haven't done that yet, but next time I go to Home Depot, I'm going to get a piece of plywood and do that. And then both the bench grinder and the belt sander are messy, and both of them you should definitely wear safety glasses. You can decide for yourself how you want to deal with the mess, but you might want to put it off to its side somewhere if you can, and so that if it makes a little bit of a mess, it doesn't mess up the rest of your shop. Okay, let's go back to the belt sander. Sorry about that I got things out of order there. Oops, too far. Okay, I want to talk about the belts for the belt sander. Okay, unless you know what you want, I would recommend something like this. This is a 24-pack of 1x30 belts, and it's 4 belts each at 120 grit, 240 grit, 400 grit, 600 grit, 800 grit, and 1000 grit. That should pretty much cover it. Now, Harbor Freight, their standard belts are coarser. Okay, here's the standard Warrior belts. They come in either 80 grit or 120 grit, and they also have these Zirconia belts, which I think are a little bit better belts, but these are even coarser. They come in 40 and 80 grit. So if you want a belt for really just removing fairly large amounts of metal, you could get something like that, but I would definitely recommend a finer belt. In the next slide, we're going to start looking at the micrographs of the different grit sizes, and I think you'll see why. Okay, let me shrink myself down here so you can see. Okay, on the left, we have a 40 grit belt, and it is very rough. You're not going to be improving anything from your saw if you're using a 40 grit belt. It's going to be as rough or rougher than what was left by your saw. So, like I said, if you want something for just removing lots of metal, that would be, a way to do it. But you're going to want to follow it up with something to smooth off the edge. And the 80 grit belt is significantly better, but it also leaves a pretty rough edge. And as you can see, as the grit size goes up, 120 is in the middle, 240 is next to the end, and 400 grit is on the far right. And when you get to 400 grit, things are starting to look pretty good. It definitely is going to be improving things significantly over some of the saws, definitely over the bandsaw. This is way better than the edge that the bandsaw was leaving. Go on to the next slide, and you can see even finer grits. Okay, we've already seen the 240 and the 400. Then the middle one here is 600 grit. And we're starting to get fairly smooth edge. Next one is 800 grit. And the last one is 1,000 grit. Oops, sorry, grabbed the wrong one. Oops. Okay, sorry about that. All right, it's time to go on to the die grinder. Okay, this is the die grinder that I have. It's a pneumatic die grinder, pretty inexpensive, sold by Harbor Freight. Works pretty well. I don't have any complaints. The only, I guess, complaint that I have about it is it uses a lot of air. So your air compressor is going to be running pretty continuously if you're using this for more than 10 or 15 seconds probably. Now, since it is powered by air, one thing that you can do is you can put an airflow regulator on it and control the speed, which I think is a pretty nice feature. So this is the airflow regulator that I use. It's a flow valve. It's not a pressure regulator. It does have a pressure gauge on it, but the brass part here and back that's controlling the flow, that's just a ball valve. Very simple. And if you want more of an actual regulator, they sell those too. They're about the same price. The cheap one is about the same price. The one that's a little bit better, I think it's called the Merlin, and it's more like $20 or thereabouts, 25 maybe. But if you're going to be using your die grinder fairly often, I think it's worth the $10 to put some sort of speed control on it. And you can use the same type thing for like your paint spray gun. One thing that you can do is instead of putting it at the tool, I have mine at the other end of a 10-foot air hose. And so then you can use the same air hose for your spray gun, and you can use this to control the pressure and flow of more than one tool. But it's not really expensive, so it's no big deal either way. And they also sell corded die grinders. Here's an example of one sold by Harbor Freight. And it's not all that expensive. It's more than the air-powered one, but it's not as much as the air die grinder and an air compressor. So depends on if you already have the air compressor. The disadvantage that I see of this tool is it's not variable speed. And I looked around briefly for a variable speed corded die grinder, and I didn't find one right off. But if you're considering buying one, look around some more and see if you can find one that's variable speed. Also, they can get a lot more expensive than this. They can get up in the $200 to $300 range. So if you're going to use it a lot, I don't think you're going to be using it all that much for building an airplane, but if you have some other use for it, it might be a reasonable way to go. Okay, so what kind of wheels do you use for your die grinder? So Cleveland Aircraft sells a smaller version of the 7A, the Scotch-Brite 7A. Sorry, there we go. So this is the 2-inch version of the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel. So it's the same wheel, just smaller. Also, I think it has a 1/4 inch arbor. I'm sure it says here. So be careful that you're going to need they sell separately a mandrel for it. So here it is. For 2-inch wheels, use 1/4 inch mandrel 3mm-140. Or you can find some sort of mandrel that you can make work at Harbor Freight or Home Depot, probably. And again, it's an excellent wheel. It's just that the 3M wheels tend to be a little more expensive. So it's not that expensive, but it is kind of expensive for a 2-inch wheel. Here's some 3-inch wheels sold on Amazon, and you get 5 for $10, so they're only $2 a piece. And they're a little bit bigger. They're not as hard. They're not going to last as long as that Scotch-Brite 7A, but then again, you get 5 of them. So I have some, and we'll look at the micrographs for both of them. And one other thing that you might want to consider for a die grinder is this abrasive ball sold by Harbor Freight. And I'm going to talk about this more when we get to the other tools section, but it does go in a die grinder. So I don't know if it really belongs here or in the other tools section coming up. But I wanted to just go ahead and mention it real quick. Okay, this is the Scotch-Brite 7A on the left and the Luo key on the right. And with a pressure regulator, you can control the speed. And these two pictures here were taken using 30 psi on the die grinder. You know, both of them are doing okay. Both of them are rounding the corner and polishing a little bit into the surface as well as the edge, but they are smoothing things up significantly. Okay, here they are again at 40 psi, and not a big change. And the next slide is 50 psi. And like I said, the die grinder does use a lot of air. So usually I use it at 30 psi. I don't see that much need to run it at 50 ps or 40 or 50 psi. If you run it at less than 30, it can stall out. It doesn't have enough push, enough air to keep it turning all the time. So I recommend somewhere around the 30 psi range, at least to start, and you can play with it and adjust it however you want it. Okay, there are some other tools. So we're moving on to them. Okay, there's a deburring blade. Sold by Cleveland Aircraft Tools. It's a V-shaped blade, so usually I just call this the V-tool. But I'm probably the only one in the world that does that. So you just run this along the edge of the metal, and it takes off a little on each corner. Not a lot, just a little bit. You know, the sharper the edge, the corner, the higher the stress. If you have a really sharp edge, the stress is much higher, and then that can affect the fatigue life of your part. So you want, in addition to just smoothing things out, which is pretty much what we've been talking about so far, you want to round things off. This helps to round things off a little bit, but it doesn't do anything at all in terms of smoothing things out. And in addition to this, Cleveland Aircraft also sells this aluminum Deburr Handle Set. So it has a little blade. It has a couple of different shaped blades, and you can use these for holes, and or you can use it for straight edges as well. And it's a similar thing. It's designed to remove a little bit of metal off the corner and slightly round things, but it doesn't do any smoothing at all. At least, well, you'll see the pictures here. Okay, on the left, this is the sample of aluminum before I used the V-tool, and on the right is after. And you can see along the edge, it's nice and shiny where the V-tool took off a little metal right at the edge, but it did not do anything at all. It took off a little bit of metal right at the corner, but it didn't do anything at all along the edge. You can still see the saw marks, or actually I think these are sanding marks. This is probably 400 grit belt sander. It does something, but it doesn't do a lot. If you can't get in, you know, if it's a hard to reach area and you can't do anything else, you can use it. But I would look for an alternative and see if I could find a better way to do things if possible. Okay, I already talked briefly about this red Scotch-Brite ball that Harbor Freight sells. I guess they call it their Abrasive Ball. And it comes in 3 different grit sizes. The one I have is the 80 grit size. And it also comes in 180, which I think is a lighter red color. And then the 400 is kind of a gray color or something. No? Oh, yes, it is. Kind of a dark gray color. Next time they're having a sale, I think I'm going to pick up the 180 and the 400 as well. Now, you do not have to use them in the shape of a ball. The way it's built is this is just a mandrel. So you can just unscrew it, and it has about 10 round pieces of Scotch-Brite pad. And so I just took it apart, and you just put 1 or 2 pieces in, and then you just have a motorized pad of Scotch-Brite. Now, for something like roughening up something before you prime it, you might want to leave it in this form for scuffing. If you want to scuff something up. But like I said, you don't have to, and it works okay. Like I said, if you just take it apart and put a couple of the pads back in and use it that way. And if you use it that way, you probably get like 10 pads. So probably last you quite a while. Okay, this is the before and after. The before is the same as the previous slide. I think this is 400 grit belt sander. And this is what it looks like after. So it's definitely attacking the surface of the sample as well as the edge. But it is doing a pretty good job of smoothing things up. It worked much better than I was expecting it to. And it would be interesting to, to get the other 2 grit sizes and see how they do as well. And maybe, if you were to use like the 400 grit followed by a finer grit, you could do even better. So for the price, if you already have the die grinder, I would recommend something like this. It's just not that expensive, and it's just a nice thing to have around. You can find uses for it. I think I could find uses for it, for non-airplane tasks as well. Cleaning up your garden tools or something like that. Okay, the next thing on the other tools list is just sandpaper. And everybody knows what sandpaper looks like, and everybody sells sandpaper. You can go buy it wherever you want. Home Depot, Harbor Freight, Amazon, everybody sells sandpaper. So this is the sample. I just sanded this by hand, and on the left is 220 grit paper, and on the right is 400 grit. And it does a pretty decent job. Again, I was kind of surprised at how well it did. But it's a fairly reasonable way to go, especially for something that's kind of hard to get to, like a lightning hole. So you can pretty easily, get a piece of sandpaper into a lightning hole and sand it up by hand fairly quickly. Whereas it's hard to get a power tool in, something like that. And the next thing on the list is a file. And again, it did better than I was expecting. It does leave a pretty rough edge, but it it could have been worse. Let's see. Okay, the file on the left is the Cleveland Aircraft file, and it's a pretty expensive file, but it is a very nice file, and it's 32 bucks. This is it in the picture here. The file on the right is just a cheap file from Harbor Freight. It's like a $3 file or something. I don't know. The disadvantage of the Harbor Freight file is probably only had it about a year, and it's starting to rust a fair amount, whereas the Cleveland Aircraft tool file looks brand new. So if you just want something that'll last you a couple years and then you can throw away, you get a cheap file. If you want something for a lifetime, you can buy a better file. Again, I would use these for removing metal, but I would definitely follow them up with something else, something to smooth things up. And the last thing on the other tools list is a Dremel. And I think, I don't have it listed here, but everybody knows what a Dremel looks like. The problem is the Dremel tools are made for pretty small applications. All of the polishing wheels and things like that are very small, and I haven't found anything that I like very well or that I use. So I'm just mentioning it. If you have a Dremel, you might see what you can do, but I haven't found it to be all that useful. Okay, so there's a trade-off to be had here on aggressiveness versus smoothness. Now, the obvious example is the sandpaper and the belt sander. You use the coarse grit sandpaper, and it's very rough, not smooth at all, but it removes material very well. And if you use the fine grit sandpaper, gives you a nice smooth edge, but it'll take you forever to remove any material. So I decided to try and quantify this a little bit. So I took some regular Vans aluminum, 2024 T3 aluminum alloy, 16 thousandths thick, and I sanded down or either ground down or sanded down the corner for 10 seconds, and then measured the length of, as you can see in the picture here, how much of the corner got removed or whatever. So here's the results. So the the gold standard wheel is the Scotch-Brite 7A 6-inch wheel, and it didn't. How do I say this? The length of the corner that it left was 6 millimeters. And the AmaCupid 9P was a little bit more aggressive. And so it was 7.5 millimeters. The 5P was significantly less aggressive, so it was only 2.5 millimeters. The AmaCupid 2000 grit I did not test, and the reason is it looked to me like putting the corner of the aluminum sample up against that wheel was going to dig a groove, a significant groove into the wheel. It was just going to cut right into the wheel. Now, like I said, I didn't actually do it, so I don't know. But I would not recommend that wheel for removing material. And I took just a hard stone wheel. It was a Harbor Freight wheel. It was labeled as 60/80 grit wheel. And that was very aggressive. And so if you need to remove lots of metal, you can do it with something like that. But as we're going to see, it leaves a very rough edge. Then for the belt sander, 40 grit is very aggressive. It's even more aggressive than the hard wheel on the bench grinder. So that's up at 17.5 millimeters. And then they pretty much progressively decrease as you go to the higher grit sizes, up to 1,000 grit. Even the 1,000 grit on the belt sander was more aggressive than the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel on the bench grinder. It was about the same as the 9P wheel. These didn't come out exactly in order. For example, it looks here like the 240 grit was more aggressive than the 120 grit, but the samples were getting hot, so I suspect that the 120 grit didn't get the full 10 seconds, and that's why it's only 12 millimeters. I guess I could have gone back and repeated the test or whatever, but it's not that big a deal. Then in terms of the die grinder, like I said, you can adjust the speed of that by adjusting the pressure. So at 30 psi, both wheels, the Scotch-Brite wheel and the Luo key wheel, took out or left a 4 millimeter corner, whatever. And as you turn the speed up, the Scotch-Brite goes from 4 to 4.5 to 6 millimeters at 50 psi. And the Luo key goes 4 to 5 to 5.5 as you turn the pressure up. So here I sorted things by aggressiveness. And so the three at the top, the 40 grit belt sander, the 80 grit on the belt sander, and the hard wheel, those are for removing metal only. You're going to have to come back with something else and smooth them out. So if you want to remove a lot of metal and you don't care what kind of edge it leaves, you could consider something like that. The ones in red, those are more in the you'd probably call them cutting tools. They're for removal, but they don't leave that bad of an edge. And in particular, you can go up to the 600 and 800 grit sandpaper and still remove a fair amount of metal and leave a pretty decent edge. And the ones in yellow are the ones I would characterize as cut and polish. So they still remove a little bit of material, but they smooth up the edge significantly. especially if you start off with a really bad edge like the bandsaw. I've already talked about how the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel is kind of the gold standard, and so that one is kind of up in the top half of the yellow ones here. And then the last two in green are what I would call polishing wheels. And that's the AmaCupid 5P and the AmaCupid 2000 grit wheel. As we're going to see shortly, my three-step process is 400 grit on the belt sander, which is in slightly darker red in this table here, followed by the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel, and then followed by one of the polishing wheels, probably the AmaCupid 5P, which is in a slightly darker green in this table. Okay, the pictures we've seen so far were primarily in the cut and polish, or just the cutting or cut and polish category. So I wanted to look at polishing a little more. So what I did was I just used these polishing tools or cut and polishing tools on the surface of the aluminum in order to try and get a better picture than just trying to photograph the edge. And it turns out that the pictures didn't come out as well as I was hoping, but I'll show you the results anyway. So if you just take 400 grit sandpaper and sand the surface of a piece of aluminum by hand, this is what you get on the far left picture here. And it doesn't look all that bad in the picture, but it's definitely leaving fairly significant marks in the surface of the aluminum. Then the next one is the AmaCupid 9P, and it's about the same, roughly speaking, as the 400 grit hand sanding. The one in the middle is the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel, and it's a little better than the 9P, but it's still leaving significant scratch marks. Then the one after that is the AmaCupid 5P, and now we're getting more into the polishing wheels. And in this case, probably what you're seeing is the remains of the marks that were left from previously. So the 5P is not aggressive enough to remove, completely, say, like 400 grit sanding marks. So you have to be careful about that. It's pretty good at polishing, but it's not quite aggressive enough to really smooth things out. So you want to use a staged approach. And then the picture on the right is the AmaCupid 2000 grit, and it's the same way. It does not remove any previously existing scratch marks, but it does smooth them out. Okay, Again, the one on the far left is just the 400 grit hand sandpaper. The one in the middle here is the die grinder with the Luo key wheel at 30 psi. And it's smoothing things out. Not great, but a little bit. And then the Scotch-Brite pad at 30 psi is doing a pretty good job of smoothing things out. Again, the marks that you're seeing in particular down at the bottom there are marks that were there previously. So it's not aggressive enough to remove those marks that were there previously. But it is doing a pretty good job of polishing. Okay, as I've already mentioned, I was interested in a three-step approach. Where step one was to remove any material necessary, and then step two was a cut and polish, and step three was more of just a polish. Oops. There we go. Okay, let me shrink the picture down again. So, step one is the belt sander at 400 grit. Before I took all these pictures, I had, I believe, an 80 grit belt in the belt sander. And I decided that I didn't really need that much removal, and I could get significantly better edges by going to a finer grit. So I've since changed my belt sander from being kind of semi-permanently set up at 80 grit to being semi-permanently set up at 400 grit. Then followed by the Scotch-Brite 7A wheel, 6-inch wheel. And that's the picture in the center here. And then that's followed by the AmaCupid 5P polishing wheel. And again, that gives a pretty smooth, rounded edge. The only disadvantage is that it is attacking the aluminum on the surface a little bit, so it might remove some of the aluminum cladding. And this is the same thing, except the polishing step is followed by the AmaCupid 2000 grit instead. So the first two pictures are basically the same. And then the third one is the 400 grit, followed by the Scotch-Brite 7A, followed by the AmaCupid 2000 grit. And that does not attack the surface nearly as much. But then again, I don't think it's quite aggressive enough, and it leaves the scratch marks from the previous step. It doesn't polish them out. So you can decide for yourself which one you prefer. And here's the two side by side. So this is the three-step with 5P as the last step on the left, and then on the right we have the last step is the AmaCupid 2000 grit. Okay, this was a fairly long video. Sorry about that. I hope you liked it. I found it pretty interesting, and I hope you did too. If you'd like to recommend these videos to other people, the way to do that is to subscribe, give them a thumbs up, or leave a comment, and then the YouTube algorithm will recommend them to other people with similar interests. And as always, I will leave links in the description for anything that I talked about. So that's it. Thanks for watching.